He was still very young when he learned what silence really felt like. Not the peaceful kind, but the heavy silence that follows loss, the kind that stays with you even when people are around. He lived in an old orphan shelter at the edge of the city, a place most people passed without noticing. The building was worn down with cracked walls and faded paint, like the children inside it who had learned not to expect too much from life. He did not remember his parents clearly. Only small pieces stayed with him: blurred faces, a warm voice humming softly, a feeling of safety that no longer existed. Over time, those memories became weaker, but the emptiness they left behind never faded. He grew up watching other children come and go. Some were adopted, some were reunited with relatives, and some, like him, stayed behind, waiting for something they couldn't describe. He wasn't loud or troublesome. He didn't fight for attention or cry loudly when he felt hurt. Instead, he learned to stay quiet. Teachers often described him as well-behaved or easy to manage, but what they didn't see was how much he had learned to hide. He kept his feelings locked inside, afraid that showing them would only lead to disappointment. Every day followed the same routine. Wake up early, help with small chores, eat simple meals, attend basic classes, then return to the shelter before sunset. Life felt like it was moving, but he felt stuck in one place. While other children talked about dreams becoming doctors, athletes, or famous people, he struggled to imagine a future at all. For him, surviving the day was already enough. In the back of the shelter, there was a large room that used to be a community hall. Most of the time, it stayed empty. The windows were dusty, and the floor creaked with every step. In one corner of that room stood an old piano. It had been there longer than anyone could remember. Some keys were broken, others were chipped, and many produced strange sounds. Most people ignored it, thinking it was useless at first. He ignored it too, but one afternoon, when the shelter was unusually quiet, he wandered into the hall to escape the noise in his head. His eyes rested on the piano. Something about it felt familiar, even though he had never touched one before. Slowly, he walked toward it, unsure why his feet were carrying him there. He sat down on the old bench. It wobbled slightly under his weight. He hesitated, staring at the keys as if they might judge him. Finally, he pressed one key gently. The sound was weak, imperfect, but it echoed through the empty hall. It startled him, yet it also made his heart beat faster. He pressed another key, then another. There was no plan, no lesson, no sheet music. Just his fingers moving without thought. The sounds didn't form a proper song, but they felt honest. For the first time in a long while, his mind grew quiet. The pain, the loneliness, the questions, all of it softened, even if only for a moment. From that day on, he returned to the piano whenever he could. Usually late in the evening, when the shelter lights were dim and everyone else was busy or asleep, the hall became his safe place. The piano became his listener. He played softly at first, afraid someone might hear and tell him to stop. But no one came. He wasn't trained. He didn't know what notes were called or how music was supposed to work. He played by feeling. When he felt sad, the sounds became slow and heavy. When he felt hopeful, they grew lighter. Sometimes tears fell onto the keys, but he kept playing anyway. It felt like the piano understood him in a way people never had. While other children found comfort in talking to friends or writing letters to people who never replied, he poured everything into those keys. The piano did not ask questions. It did not remind him of what he lacked. It simply accepted whatever he gave. Still, during the day, he went back to being invisible. He blended into the background, avoided attention, and followed rules quietly. Most people barely remembered his face. Some staff members thought he was just shy. Others believed he had nothing special about him. No one imagined that. At night, he was creating something beautiful. Sometimes, he wondered if his parents would have liked his music. That thought often made his chest ache. He wished they were there, even if only to listen once. But wishing never changed anything, so he kept those thoughts to himself. The piano wasn't perfect, and neither was he. Some nights, keys got stuck. Other nights, the sound was too loud or too soft. but he kept trying. Each mistake felt like a lesson, even though no one was teaching him. Slowly, without realizing it, his fingers grew more confident. The sounds began to connect. What once felt like random notes started turning into something meaningful. Even then, he never thought of himself as talented. He thought of music as a place to rest, not something that could change his life. Fame, success, or recognition were ideas far from his reality. His world was small, and he had learned not to dream beyond it. Outside the shelter, the city moved quickly. People rushed to work, complained about small problems, and chased goals without realizing how lucky they were. Inside the shelter, life moved slowly. Time felt heavy, especially for someone with no one waiting for them. He watched from the sidelines, feeling like life was happening to others, not to him, but every night when his fingers touched the piano keys, something inside him changed. He felt less alone, less broken, less forgotten. He didn't know it yet, but those quiet nights were shaping him. That simple piano, hidden away in an empty hall, was becoming more than an escape. It was becoming his voice, a voice that, one day, would travel far beyond the shelter walls. For now, though, he remained just another orphan in a forgotten place, quiet, unnoticed, and carrying a song the world had not yet heard. As days passed, the piano slowly became a part of his life, almost like a quiet friend, waiting patiently for him every evening. He did not talk about it to anyone. He didn't feel the need to explain it, and deep inside he feared that if people knew, they might take it away. So he kept it secret, visiting the old hall only when he was sure no one would notice. Late nights were his favorite. The shelter grew calm after lights were turned off, and the usual noise faded into soft whispers. That was when he slipped out of his room, careful not to wake anyone. His footsteps were slow and light, as if even the floor could give him away. Each time he reached the hall, his heart beat a little faster, not from fear, but from something close to excitement. He sat at the piano and took a deep breath. Some nights, his hands shook. Other nights, they felt strong and steady. He never knew what kind of song would come out. He didn't plan anything. He just let his feelings guide his fingers. The piano responded in its own broken way, but that never bothered him. In fact, the flaws made it feel more real. The music he played was simple, but it carried weight. It held all the emotions he never spoke out loud. The loneliness of growing up without parents, the pain of watching others leave while he stayed behind, the quiet hope that maybe, someday, things could be different. Every note carried a piece of his heart. Sometimes he played very softly, barely touching the keys. Other times, he pressed them harder, letting the sound fill the empty room. When the music grew louder, it felt like he was finally letting out years of sadness. When it grew quiet again, it felt like a gentle reminder to keep going. One night, after a long and tiring day, he felt heavier than usual. The shelter had been loud, and the children restless. Someone had said something careless, not meant to hurt, but it did. He didn't respond. He never did. He just waited for night to fall. That evening, when he sat at the piano, something changed. His fingers moved more slowly, and the melody that came out felt deeper. It wasn't just random sounds anymore. It was a song. A simple one, but clear and honest. Even he felt surprised by it. He played the same melody again and again, each time adding something new. A pause here. A longer note there. He closed his eyes and let himself feel everything he had been holding back. Tears rolled down his cheeks, but he didn't stop playing. In that moment, crying didn't feel weak. It felt necessary. Unknown to him, the sound of the piano traveled farther than usual that night. The door to the hall wasn't fully closed. The melody slipped through the hallway and reached the far end of the building. Someone walking past slowed down, then stopped. That person stood still, listening. They had lived around the shelter for years and had heard many noises come from IT laughter. Arguments, crying, but never this. The music felt different. It wasn't polished or perfect, but it was full of emotion. It felt like someone telling a story without words. They didn't know who was playing. They didn't see his face or know his story. But they felt something shift inside them. The The song reminded them of things they had buried long ago, regrets, loss, moments they never healed from. Without realizing it, their eyes filled with tears. They didn't interrupt. They didn't open the door. They just listened quietly until the music stopped. Inside the hall, the boy sat frozen for a moment after the last note faded. He wiped his face quickly, embarrassed even though no one was there. He felt drained, but lighter at the same time, like he had left a piece of his pain behind on the piano. He stood up, unaware that his secret had almost been discovered. As he walked back to his room, he felt calm. He slept better that night than he had in a long time. The next day felt different, even though nothing had changed. The shelter looked the same. The people acted the same. But inside him, something had shifted. The song from the night before stayed with him. He found himself humming it quietly while doing chores. That evening, he returned to the piano earlier than usual. He wanted to find that song again, afraid it might disappear if he didn't. His fingers searched for the notes, and slowly, the melody returned. This time, he felt more confident. He wasn't just playing to release pain anymore. He was shaping something meaningful. Once again, the sound traveled beyond the hall. This time, more than one person noticed. A staff member passing by paused, confused. They had never heard the piano sound like that before. They leaned closer, listening carefully. The music didn't feel like something a child should be able to play without training. It felt honest and raw. Still, they didn't go in. Something about the moment felt fragile, like it could break if disturbed. Inside, the boy played on, completely unaware. He wasn't performing. He wasn't trying to impress anyone. He was simply being himself, for once, without fear or masks. Over the next few nights, the pattern continued. He played. Someone listened. Sometimes one person. Sometimes two. No one spoke about it. No one approached him. It was like an unspoken agreement to protect the purity of the moment. The people who heard the music carried it with them. Some thought about it during work. Some mentioned it quietly at home. Others returned to the shelter at night, pretending they were just passing by, hoping to hear it again. And every time they did, it touched them in a different way. The song began to change, just like he did. It grew richer, deeper, and more connected. It still carried sadness, but now there was also hope. A gentle strength. A feeling that even broken things could create something beautiful. The boy still didn't see himself as special. He still believed he was just an orphan playing on a broken piano. But slowly, without knowing it, his music was doing something powerful. It was reaching people. It was reminding them of feelings they had forgotten. It was opening hearts. And this time, the silence that followed the music didn't feel empty. It felt full of emotion, meaning, and the beginning of something that could change everything. The music no longer belonged only to the quiet hall. It had begun to slip into the lives of others, even though the boy still believed he was playing alone. Each night, when his fingers touched the keys, the air felt different, as if the room itself was listening closely. He didn't notice the small changes around him. They were happening slowly and gently. At first, the listeners stayed hidden. They stood in hallways, near doors, or outside the building, pretending they had somewhere else to be. They didn't want to disturb him. Something about the way he played felt deeply personal, almost private. It felt wrong to interrupt. The boy, unaware of any of this, continued his routine. Days were still quiet and ordinary. He helped where he was asked, ate his meals without complaint, and stayed out of trouble. He remained the same shy child to everyone who spoke to him. No one treated him differently during the day, but at night, things were changing. One evening, as he walked toward the hall, he sensed something unusual. Not fear, not danger, but a strange feeling of warmth. He brushed it off and sat at the piano. The bench creaked as usual. The keys felt cool under his fingers. He took a deep breath and began to play. The melody flowed gently, steady and calm. It was a song he had been shaping over many nights. It felt familiar, like a story he knew by heart. His shoulders relaxed as he played. For once, he didn't feel like he was carrying everything alone. Outside the hall, two people stood quietly. They hadn't planned to meet, but both had been drawn by the sound. They exchanged a brief glance, then looked away, respecting the moment. Neither spoke. Words felt unnecessary. The music filled the space between them. It moved slowly, like a soft wave. One listener felt their chest tighten. They thought of a time when life felt uncertain, when they too had felt unseen. Another listener closed their eyes, remembering someone they had lost years ago. The song didn't remind them of pain alone. It reminded them that they had survived it. Inside the hall, the boy played on, eyes half closed. He felt something new that night. It was small, but noticeable. It felt like connection. Even though he believed he was alone, his heart felt less empty. When the song ended, he stayed still for a moment, hands resting on the keys. The silence that followed didn't feel cold. It felt gentle, like a pause meant to be respected. He stood up slowly and left the room. The listeners waited until his footsteps faded before moving. Neither spoke about what they had heard. They didn't need to. The music had already said everything. The next day, something unexpected happened. During breakfast, one of the staff members looked at the boy for a moment longer than usual. Not in a suspicious way, but with curiosity. The boy noticed and quickly looked down, uncomfortable. He wasn't used to being noticed. Later that afternoon, another child asked him a simple question. "Do you like music?" The boy hesitated, then nodded slightly. That was all he said. He didn't explain. He didn't want to. That night, when he returned to the piano, he noticed the door to the hall was slightly more open than before. He paused, unsure. For a brief moment, fear crept in. What if someone was inside? What if they told him to stop? He almost turned back, but something inside him urged him forward. He sat down and began to play, softer than usual at first. As the song continued, his confidence returned. The music grew stronger, clearer. This time, more people gathered. They stood farther back, careful not to be seen. Some leaned against walls. Some stood outside, letting the cool air brush against their faces as they listened. There were no phones raised. No whispers. Just quiet attention. The song that night felt different. It carried a sense of longing, but also strength. It felt like a hand reaching out, not begging, but offering understanding. Some listeners felt tears fall without warning. Others smiled gently, feeling comfort they hadn't felt in a long time. One listener had been struggling deeply. Life had felt heavy for months, filled with worries that never seemed to end. Standing there, listening to the boy play, they felt something loosen inside them. The music didn't solve their problems, but it reminded them they weren't alone in their pain. Another listener thought about the boy himself. They wondered who he was, what he had lived through, and how someone so young could carry so much emotion in such a simple song. The thought stayed with them long after the music ended. Inside the hall, the boy finished playing and slowly stood up. He felt tired, but in a good way, like he had run a long distance and reached a safe place. As he turned to leave, he thought he heard a sound, a soft movement, a breath. His heart skipped. He looked toward the door, but saw nothing. The hall was empty, just as always. He shook his head, telling himself he was imagining things. Still, the feeling stayed with him as he walked back to his room. Over the next few days, the quiet audience grew. Not large, but steady. Different people came on different nights. Some stayed only once. Others returned again and again. No one announced it. No one made it official. It just happened. The boy sensed the change more clearly now. He felt less alone while playing, even though he couldn't see anyone. The hall felt warmer. The silence felt alive. One night, as he played, his hands trembled slightly, not from fear, but from emotion. He realized something important. His music mattered. Even if he didn't know how or why, it mattered. That realization scared him. He had spent so long believing he was invisible, that the idea of being heard felt overwhelming. He worried that if people truly noticed him, they might expect things he couldn't give. Or worse, take away the one thing that made him feel whole. Still, he kept playing. The The music continued to bring people together in quiet ways. Some listeners spoke softly to each other afterward, sharing feelings they rarely discussed. Others carried the peace with them into their daily lives. The song stayed in their minds during busy days and restless nights. No one applauded. No one clapped. The boy never heard praise or compliments, but the impact was real. It lived in tears wiped away quietly, in deep breaths taken after long days, in hearts softened by a simple melody. For the boy, life during the day remained mostly unchanged. He was still quiet, still reserved, still unsure of his place in the world, but inside, something was growing. A sense of purpose, fragile but real. He didn't know where this path would lead. He didn't know how many people were listening, or how deeply they were affected. He only knew that when he played, something true came out of him, and that truth was reaching others in ways he could never have imagined. What began as a secret escape was becoming something shared. A small audience, standing silently in the shadows, carrying big emotions they hadn't expected, and the boy, still unaware of how many lives he was touching, continued to play his heart into every note, unaware that this was only the beginning. The change did not happen all at once. It moved slowly, like morning light spreading across a dark room. The boy still played the piano every night, sitting on the same old bench, touching the same worn keys. But the feeling around him was no longer the same. The hall no longer felt empty. It felt alive, even when no one was visible. The people who listened began to carry the music with them into their own lives. Some of them had never spoken to each other before. Yet now, they shared quiet looks of understanding in the hallway. They didn't talk about the boy directly, but they talked about how the music made them feel. They spoke about memories they had pushed aside for years, about pain they never allowed themselves to face. One listener was someone who worked long hours and had forgotten how to slow down. Each night after hearing the piano, they found themselves breathing more deeply, noticing small things, again the sound of wind, the warmth of a cup of tea, the comfort of silence. The music reminded them that life was more than just rushing from one day to the next. Another listener had been carrying grief for a long time. They had learned to hide it well, smiling when expected, moving forward because they had to. But the piano song broke through that wall. It allowed them to feel without shame. After listening, they went home and looked at old photos for the first time in years, not with pain alone, but with gratitude. The boy knew none of this. To him, the piano was still just a place where he could be honest. He did notice, however, that his own feelings were changing. He felt stronger, not louder or bolder, but steadier. When someone spoke sharply to him during the day, it hurt less. When he felt lonely, the feeling didn't stay as long as before. One afternoon, something unexpected happened. A staff member asked him if he liked music and if he wanted to help clean the community hall. The boy nodded quietly. While cleaning, the staff member mentioned that the piano sounded different lately. The boy's heart raced. He kept his head down, unsure what to say. The staff member didn't press further. They just smiled softly and said, "It's nice." That small moment stayed with him all day. It wasn't praise. It wasn't a big moment, but it was the first time someone had noticed something he cared about. It made his chest feel warm and uneasy at the same time. That night he played with more care than ever before. Each note felt important. He imagined the music as something fragile, like a small light that needed protection. He didn't want it to disappear. The quiet audience grew a little more. A few people began to arrive earlier, standing farther away, making sure they were never seen. No one wanted to scare him. There was a shared understanding among them, even though no one said it out loud. This was his space, his moment. Some listeners began to talk to others outside the shelter. Not in a dramatic way, but gently. They mentioned a piano, song, a feeling they couldn't explain. Curiosity grew. A few new faces appeared, drawn by nothing more than a quiet story passed from one person to another. The music began to ripple outward. One evening, the boy arrived at the hall and noticed something new. A small lamp had been fixed near the piano, giving off a soft light. He froze, unsure. He hadn't asked for it. He didn't know who had done it. For a moment, fear returned. He wondered if this meant his secret was over. He sat down slowly, hands resting on his knees. The hall was silent. He could hear his own breathing. Then, carefully, he began to play. The light made the keys easier to see, but it also made him feel exposed. Still, once the melody started, the fear faded. The music carried him, just like before. The song that night was calm and steady, filled with quiet hope. Outside the hall, a few listeners exchanged gentle smiles. One of them had brought the lamp, wanting to help without being noticed. They felt relief knowing he was still playing. The boy left the hall that night feeling confused but thankful. Someone cared enough to make things easier for him, even if they stayed invisible. That thought stayed with him as he lay in bed, staring at the ceiling. Over the following weeks, small changes continued. The piano was tuned as best as it could be. A few broken keys were fixed. No one made a big announcement. No one told him why. Things just slowly improved. With each improvement, his playing grew stronger. He experimented more. He allowed the music to rise and fall naturally. Sometimes the song felt joyful. Other times, it felt heavy again. But now, there was balance. Pain and hope lived together in the melody. The listeners noticed this too. Some began to change because of it. One person who had always avoided emotional moments finally opened up to a loved one. Another found the courage to forgive someone they had been angry with for years. These were not loud changes. They were quiet, personal, and deeply real. The music didn't fix lives. It didn't solve problems. But it opened doors inside people that had been locked for a long time. For the boy, daytime still felt uncertain. He still didn't know what his future looked like. He still worried about growing older without a clear path. But now, there was something steady inside him. A sense that he mattered, even if he didn't fully understand why. One afternoon, he was asked if he wanted to play the piano during a small gathering at the shelter. The request was gentle, not demanding. Still, his heart pounded. The idea of being seen scared him more than being alone ever had. He didn't answer right away. That night, his music was softer, slower. The listeners could feel the hesitation in every note. The boy was standing at a crossroads, even if he didn't realize it yet. A place between hiding and being heard. Some listeners felt protective. They didn't want the world to rush in and take something pure. Others felt hopeful. They believed his music deserved space to grow. The boy finished playing and sat quietly for a long time. He thought about the question he had been asked. About being seen. About being heard. About what it might cost. He thought about the piano. About how it had never judged him. How it had given him a place to exist without explanation. Slowly, he stood up and placed his hand on the piano, almost like saying thank you. The changes around him continued, but one thing stayed the same. He still played from the heart. He still played honestly. No matter how many people listened or how far the music traveled, it was never about attention. It was about connection. Lives were shifting quietly because of a simple song played by a boy who once believed he didn't matter. Hearts were opening because someone brave enough to feel chose to sit at a broken piano and play anyway. And though the boy didn't yet understand the full impact of what he was doing, the world around him was already different because he had dared to let his music be heard. The question stayed with him for many days. The idea of playing in front of others felt heavy in his chest. Until now, the piano had been his safe place. A place where he could be real without being watched. The thought of people sitting in front of him, looking at him, expecting something, made his hands feel cold. He continued with his daily routine, but his mind was often somewhere else. During chores, during meals, even while lying in bed at night, he kept thinking about that small gathering they had mentioned. It wasn't a big event, just a few people from the shelter. Still, to him, it felt like standing at the edge of something unknown. At night, when he played the piano, his music changed again. It became thoughtful, slow, and careful. The listeners could feel it. They sensed his uncertainty, his fear, and his struggle. Some of them wished they could tell him it was okay, that he didn't have to be perfect. But they stayed silent, trusting the music to guide him. One night as he played, He made a small mistake. A key slipped. The sound came out wrong. Normally he would correct himself and move on. This time he stopped. His hands rested on the keys and he stared at them for a long moment. Then he did something different. He smiled softly and continued playing. The mistake stayed in the song, but it didn't ruin it. In fact, it made it more real. The listeners felt a warmth in their hearts. It reminded them that life didn't need to be perfect to be beautiful. That was the moment something changed. Inside him, he realized that the piano never asked him to be flawless. It only asked him to be honest. And maybe people were the same. Maybe being seen didn't mean being judged. Maybe it meant being understood. A few days later, he gave a quiet answer. He said yes. The evening of the gathering arrived. The community hall looked different. Chairs were placed neatly. The soft lamp near the piano was turned on. The room felt calm, not loud or demanding, just gentle. He stood behind the piano, heart racing. His hands trembled slightly. For a moment, he wanted to run back to his room and hide under the covers. But then he looked at the piano. The same piano that had listened to him night after night. The same piano that never turned him away. He sat down. The room grew quiet. He took a deep breath, began to play. The first notes were soft, almost shy. But as the melody continued, his fear slowly melted away. The music took over, just like it always had. He forgot about the chairs, forgot about the eyes watching him. It was just him and the song. People listened with full attention. Some closed their eyes. Some held their hands together tightly. The music filled the room, carrying everything he had lived through. Loneliness, hope, strength, and quiet courage. When the final note faded, no one spoke right away. Then slowly, gentle claps filled the room. They were not loud or dramatic. They were warm, respectful, full of gratitude. His eyes filled with tears. Not from sadness, but from something new. Something he had never felt before, belonging. After that night, things began to move forward in ways he never expected. People spoke to him more, not with pressure, but with kindness. They asked how he learned to play, simply said he listened to his heart. That answer stayed with many of them. Word of his music traveled beyond the shelter. A few visitors came, not to judge or use him, but to listen. Some brought old music books. Others brought encouragement. Everything happened slowly, carefully, so he never felt overwhelmed. He continued to play. But he never forgot where it all started. Late nights, an empty hall, a broken piano, a lonely boy searching for peace. As time passed, opportunities came his way. He was offered lessons, guidance, support. Each step was taken with care, making sure he felt safe and respected. He learned more about music, but he never lost the feeling behind it. What mattered most was that he stayed true to himself. He didn't chase attention. He didn't play to impress, played to connect. And people felt that. They didn't see a performer. They saw a human being sharing something real. The people who had once listened quietly from the shadows often spoke about how his music had changed them. Some said it helped them heal. Some said it helped them forgive. Others said it simply reminded them to feel again. The boy listened to these stories with humility. He never thought of himself as someone who changed lives. He just knew that music had saved him, and somehow it was now helping others too. Even as his world grew bigger, he stayed grounded. He visited the old hall often. He touched the piano keys with gratitude. He remembered the nights when no one was watching, when the music was his only comfort. He understood something important now. Pain doesn't disappear just because life improves, but it can be transformed. It can become strength. It can become kindness. It can become a song that reaches hearts you may never meet. One evening, long after everything had changed, he sat at a piano again. Not the old one this time, but a new one. The room was brighter. The audience was larger. Still, he played the same way. From the heart, as the music filled the room, he smiled softly. He was no longer the invisible orphan hiding in silence. He was someone who had found his voice and chose to use it with care. And in that moment, it became clear to everyone listening, sometimes the simplest song played with honesty can travel farther than the loudest noise. Sometimes a broken beginning can lead to a beautiful ending. His story wasn't about fame or success. It was about connection, about healing, about the power of being real in a world that often forgets how. And long after the last note faded, the feeling stayed. Because a simple piano song once played in an empty hall by a forgotten child had touched hearts and changed lives forever.